What if staying in one place was actually the most dangerous decision an ancient human could make? Let that sink in. Modern life is built around staying put. Same home, same neighborhood, sometimes the same city for an entire lifetime. Ancient human life worked almost the opposite way. Movement wasn't unusual, it was constant. So why did ancient humans migrate so much? Not once, not occasionally, but as an ongoing, repeated pattern across nearly the entire span of human history. Think about this. Migration wasn't a single dramatic decision made once. It was a continuous response to constantly shifting conditions. Let that sink in. To understand why ancient humans moved so much, we have to understand what made staying still so risky in the first place. Number 1, resources were never permanently reliable. Think about this. A region rich with food and water one season could become significantly less productive the next. Let that sink in. Droughts, changing rainfall patterns, shifts in plant growth cycles. The natural world simply wasn't stable enough to guarantee long-term security in one location. Think about this. A group that refused to move no matter what risked slowly running out of the very resources keeping them alive. Number 2, animals moved and humans depended on animals. Let that sink in. Many ancient human groups relied heavily on hunting for food, but animals weren't stationary either. Think about this. Herds followed seasonal grazing patterns, water availability, and temperature changes. If the animals moved, and a group's survival depended on those animals, staying behind wasn't a realistic option. Let that sink in. Migration, in many cases, wasn't a choice at all. It was simply following the same patterns that kept an entire ecosystem alive. Number 3, population growth created pressure over time. Think about this. As a group's size increased, the same territory that once comfortably supported everyone began to feel significantly smaller. Let that sink in. More people meant more competition for the same hunting grounds, the same water sources, the same limited resources. Think about this. Splitting off and moving to new territory often reduced tension and competition far more effectively than staying and competing directly. Number 4, climate shifts reshaped the entire map over time. Let that sink in. Ice ages expanded and retreated across thousands of years. Sea levels rose and fell dramatically. Think about this. Regions that were once completely uninhabitable due to extreme cold sometimes became livable as temperatures shifted. Areas that once supported large populations sometimes became far less hospitable as conditions changed. Let that sink in. Ancient humans weren't just reacting to weather, they were responding to changes that reshaped which parts of the entire planet were survivable at all. But wait, some of the most remarkable migrations required something the environment had to provide directly. Number 5, land bridges opened entirely new paths. Think about this. During periods of lower sea levels, land that is underwater today was fully exposed. Let that sink in. One of the most significant examples connected what is now Siberia and Alaska, a land bridge researchers refer to as Beringia. Think about this. This temporary connection allowed ancient humans to migrate from Asia into the Americas, entering a completely new continent, with no humans present at all before their arrival. Let that sink in. This single geological window changed the entire population history of 2 continents. Number 6, migration wasn't only about escaping danger. Think about this. Sometimes it was about pursuing opportunity. Let that sink in. A region with abundant resources, favorable climate, or reduced competition from other groups represented a genuine incentive to explore and relocate. Think about this. Not every migration was purely defensive or reactive. Some were strategic, deliberate attempts to improve a group's overall chances of long-term survival. But wait, migration itself carried enormous risk. Number 7, moving into unknown territory was genuinely dangerous. Let that sink in. Unfamiliar predators, unknown plants, some edible, some dangerous, diseases the group had never encountered before. Think about this. Every migration was, in some sense, a calculated gamble. The risks of staying had to outweigh the very real risks of leaving. Let that sink in. Groups didn't migrate casually. They migrated when the alternative, staying in a failing or shrinking environment, became even more dangerous than the unknown. Number 8, adaptation followed migration closely. Think about this. Moving into a new environment often required rapid behavioral and eventually physical adaptation. Let that sink in. New climates required new clothing strategies, new shelter designs, new hunting and gathering techniques suited to unfamiliar terrain and unfamiliar prey. Think about this. Over many generations, this pattern of migration followed by adaptation contributed directly to the incredible diversity of human cultures and physical traits seen around the world today. Let that sink in. Nearly every distinct regional adaptation in human history traces back to a group that once made the difficult decision to move. But wait, genetic evidence today still carries the fingerprint of these ancient movements. Think about this. Researchers can trace broad migration patterns by studying genetic markers passed down across countless generations. Let that sink in. These genetic trails reveal a remarkably consistent story. Humans didn't simply appear scattered across the globe. They arrived gradually through wave after wave of migration, stretching across tens of thousands of years. But wait, not every group migrated for the same distance or duration. Think about this. Some migrations covered enormous distances, unfolding across many generations. Others were far smaller in scale. Let that sink in. A group might relocate seasonally, moving between a handful of familiar territories throughout the year, following predictable patterns of water availability, plant growth, or animal movement. Think about this. This kind of cyclical, seasonal migration wasn't a single dramatic journey. It was a repeated, deliberate rhythm, practiced generation after generation. Let that sink in. Not all movement was into the unknown. Much of it was a return to familiar, trusted locations, timed carefully around the seasons. But wait, knowledge of these routes had to be preserved somehow. Think about this. Without written maps, this information had to be passed down directly. Elders teaching younger members of the group exactly where water could reliably be found, which paths avoided dangerous terrain, which routes aligned with the movement of prey animals. Let that sink in. This wasn't casual wandering. It was detailed, accumulated geographic knowledge, carried entirely within human memory and passed down through direct teaching. Think about this. Losing this knowledge, through the death of key elders or the collapse of a group, could be just as dangerous as losing physical resources themselves. But wait, migration also reshaped how different groups interacted with one another. Think about this. As groups moved into new territories, they sometimes encountered other human groups already established there. Let that sink in. This could lead to competition over shared resources, but it could also lead to something else entirely. Exchange. Think about this. Sharing of tools, techniques, and knowledge between previously separate groups may have accelerated innovation in ways that isolated, non-migrating populations never experienced. Let that sink in. Movement didn't just spread people across the planet. It spread ideas, skills, and innovations alongside them. But wait, not every migration attempt succeeded. Think about this. Some groups likely moved into new territory only to find conditions just as harsh or even harsher than what they left behind. Let that sink in. Archaeological evidence suggests some early migrations simply failed. Groups that ventured into unsustainable environments without the resources or adaptation needed to survive long-term. Think about this. Migration wasn't a guaranteed solution. It was a calculated risk, and not every calculation worked out. Let that sink in. The successful migrations we can trace today represent the outcomes that worked. Countless others likely ended in failure, leaving little trace behind. But wait, even the decision of when to leave required careful judgment. Think about this. Leaving too early, before conditions truly demanded it, meant abandoning a still viable territory unnecessarily. Leaving too late meant facing migration in a weakened, poorly resourced state. Let that sink in. Reading these signs correctly, deciding the right moment to move, was itself a critical survival skill, built through experience and careful observation of the environment. So why did ancient humans migrate? Not for one single reason, repeated identically every time, but because survival demanded constant flexibility, following resources, following animals, escaping shrinking territory, adapting to a constantly shifting climate, sometimes forced by necessity, sometimes driven by opportunity. Think about this. The idea of permanently settling in one single location is actually a relatively recent development in the full span of human history. Let that sink in. For most of the time humans have existed, movement wasn't the exception. It was the strategy that kept an entire species alive, adapting and ultimately spreading across every corner of the planet.